Put my pay stub down, Diane. The room went quiet so quickly I could hear the ice settling in 7 glasses. My mother-in-law stood at the head of my dining table with one hand on a photograph of me outside a law office and the other on a bank envelope she had opened without my permission. My husband, Evan, sat beside her. His Aunt Ruth, 2 cousins, and the associate pastor from Diane's church had been invited to what I had been told was a family dinner. They were all staring at me as if I were the defendant in a trial I had not known was happening. I was still holding the lemon cake I had bought to celebrate the biggest promotion of my career. Diane smiled and said, "If you have nothing to hide, Claire, show my son the account." Evan did not ask why his mother had my mail. He looked at me and repeated her demand. That was the moment I understood exactly how far he had let her go. What none of them understood was that the blue binder in my work bag contained 8 months of answers, and one question Diane had spent 22 years making sure her son never asked. 18 months earlier, I had cried while walking down the aisle because I believed I was finally joining a family instead of carrying one. My mother died from complications of lupus when I was 15. My father, Frank, raised my younger brother and me in a narrow brick house outside Richmond, Virginia, while working maintenance at a paper plant. He could repair a water heater, stretch a pot roast across 3 dinners, and sit beside a frightened child without filling the silence with promises he could not keep. From him I learned steadiness. From losing my mother, I learned a more dangerous lesson: love meant making yourself useful enough that no one would leave. By 39, I had built a life around being useful. I worked in payroll compliance for a regional hospital system. I liked finding a number that did not belong, tracing it through timesheets and benefit codes, and returning it to the right place. Numbers did not sigh when you asked a question. They did not call you selfish. They did not tell you the truth was disrespectful. I met Evan during an audit of contractor overtime. He managed service crews for a commercial heating company and arrived at our first meeting with every invoice labeled, every change order attached, and a thermos of coffee he forgot to drink. He was 42, soft-spoken, and careful in a way I mistook for emotional maturity. When a technician interrupted him, Evan listened. When I corrected a $6,800 discrepancy, he thanked me instead of defending himself. I noticed both things. We dated for 2 years. He remembered the anniversary of my mother's death without turning it into a performance. He helped Dad replace the porch rail. He never complained when my brother's children climbed over him during Sunday dinner. With Evan, quiet felt safe. His mother was never openly cruel while we were dating. Diane had perfected a kind of concern that left no fingerprints. "Claire is so independent," she would say while refilling Evan's plate. "I just hope she knows marriage requires flexibility." Or, "A payroll job must make a person very exacting. Evan has always needed warmth more than rules." If I reacted, she looked wounded. If I stayed silent, everyone moved on. Evan's father, Michael, had died after a stroke when Evan was 20. Diane never remarried. The story I heard was that she had held everything together after the funeral, worked the front desk at a dental office, and sacrificed every comfort to keep Evan in college. Evan carried that story like a debt with no final payment. Whenever Diane called during dinner, he answered. Whenever she said her car sounded strange, he drove across town. When she became upset, his shoulders folded inward and his voice took on the careful tone of a boy approaching an injured animal. I saw it. I simply believed marriage would change the center of gravity. 3 weeks before our wedding, Diane slipped on the steps outside church and bruised her hip. The emergency room found no fracture, and her doctor told her to walk carefully for a few days. Evan called me that night. "Mom is scared to be alone," he said. "The beach house has a downstairs bedroom. What if she came with us for the first 3 days? Ruth could pick her up after that." I thought he was joking. On our honeymoon? Not with us. Just in the same rental. She'd stay downstairs. We would still have the whole upper floor. "Evan, we can arrange meals. Your aunt offered to stay with her." He exhaled into the phone. "The wedding is already hard for her. Dad's birthday falls that week. I don't want to start our marriage by abandoning my mother." There it was, a choice dressed as a moral test. I wanted to say no. Instead, I remembered Dad warming canned soup after a 12-hour shift and told myself compassion was not surrender. 3 days, I said. 3 days, he promised. Diane stayed all 6. We rented a weathered cedar house in Nag's Head with a view of the dunes. On our wedding night, I stood in the upstairs bathroom removing 47 hairpins while Evan sat on the edge of the bed staring at his phone. He kissed my forehead, said the day had exhausted him, and turned toward the wall. At 12:17 a.m., his phone vibrated once. He slipped from bed and went downstairs. I waited 5 minutes before following. The hallway light was off, but a thin amber line showed beneath Diane's door. I heard a man's voice from inside, faint and grainy, as if it had traveled through an old speaker. "Take care of your mother, son. Family is what stays." Then the recording stopped. Diane spoke in the low, solemn voice she used at gravesides. Your father knew what would happen if a woman pulled you away. He warned us. Evan sniffed. Claire isn't trying to pull me away. Not yet. Women like her do it with rules. Separate holidays. Private accounts. Boundaries. By the time you notice, your mother is a visitor and your wife owns every decision. Mom, please. It's our wedding night. Exactly. And where is she while you're grieving your father? Upstairs, waiting for you to forget him. I stood barefoot on the last stair, one hand gripping the railing. Diane did not know I could hear. Evan did not defend me again. A few seconds later, the recording played from the beginning. Take care of your mother, son. Family is what stays. I returned to bed before Evan came upstairs. He lay down at 1:06 a.m., smelling faintly of Diane's lavender hand cream. I kept my eyes closed until dawn. At breakfast, Diane sat beside Evan and asked if he had slept well. She had arranged the plates so my chair faced the kitchen wall. Like a rock, he said. I looked at him, waiting for some sign that the night had troubled him. He buttered Diane's toast. Our honeymoon became a series of small cancellations. Diane's hip hurt before our lighthouse tour, so Evan stayed at the house. She felt dizzy when we planned dinner by the sound, so he ordered takeout. On the one afternoon we walked alone along the shore, his phone rang 4 times in 20 minutes. Next year we'll come back by ourselves, he told me. The wind drove sand against my ankles. Will we? He pulled me close as if affection could substitute for an answer. Back in Virginia, we moved into the house we had purchased before the wedding. It was a modest 3-bedroom colonial in Midlothian, with a maple tree out front and a converted sunroom where I kept my sewing table. Dad had given me $38,000 from the sale of my grandmother's land. I used it for most of the down payment. Evan and I were both on the deed and mortgage. We agreed that my larger contribution did not make the house less ours. 6 weeks after the wedding, Diane called to say a supply line had burst in her condo. She sent Evan photographs of buckled flooring and a wet kitchen cabinet. Her insurance adjuster estimated 3 weeks for drying and repairs. She can use the guest room, Evan said. It's temporary. I reminded him that Aunt Ruth had a basement apartment. Mom says Ruth's stairs are too steep. A hotel near us would be covered by her policy. She doesn't feel safe in hotels. Claire, her home is torn apart. Again, my hesitation became evidence against my character. Diane arrived with 14 boxes, 2 garment racks, a television, her own recliner, and a framed portrait of Michael large enough to hang over a fireplace. I watched the movers carry her belongings past the guest room. Why are those going into the sunroom? I asked. Diane pressed a hand to her hip. The guest room is too dark. Sunlight helps my depression. Evan said you hardly use that room. I looked at my husband. I said you mostly sew on weekends, he replied. We can move your table into the basement for a few weeks. My sewing machine had belonged to my mother. Dad had kept it wrapped in a bedsheet for 24 years before giving it to me when we bought the house. I ran my fingers across its scratched wooden case, then helped Evan carry it downstairs. Diane's 3 weeks became 2 months. When I asked about the repairs, she said the contractor was waiting for cabinets. At 4 months, she said the insurance company was disputing mold treatment. By 7 months, she no longer offered explanations. Her portrait of Michael hung in my sunroom. Her mail arrived at our address. She referred to the guest bathroom as hers and told visitors she had moved in to help the newlyweds settle. What she helped with was supervision. She inspected the groceries and circled items she considered wasteful. She folded my blouses because she said I hung them incorrectly. She entered our bedroom to collect laundry after I asked her not to. If I closed the door during a call with Dad, she found a reason to knock. Dinner became a daily test I could not pass. Evan can't eat onions this large, she said one evening, lifting a piece from the stew. He's eaten my stew for 3 years. People eat many things to avoid hurting someone's feelings. Evan kept his eyes on his bowl. Do the onions bother you? I asked him. He glanced at Diane, then at me. Maybe cut them a little smaller next time. The answer hurt more than Diane's criticism because it told her the system worked. She began commenting on my clothes, my weight, and the time I came home. Nothing was direct enough to repeat without sounding oversensitive. That dress is brave for an office, she said. You must trust your department not to notice when you're gone. It is wonderful that Claire's father still needs her so much. Some men never learn to let daughters build their own homes. That last comment was so perfectly shaped that I almost admired it. Diane could accuse Dad of the very thing she was doing while making me feel disloyal for calling him. My closest friend, Tess, visited on a Saturday in March. We had known each other since community college, and she was the kind of person who noticed when I changed shampoo. After 20 minutes in my kitchen, she followed me to the basement under the pretense of seeing a quilt. Why is your mother-in-law opening your mail? She whispered. She isn't. She picked up a hospital envelope, held it to the light, and put it under a magazine when you came in. I felt a cold pressure behind my ribs. Maybe she thought it was Evan's. Tess studied me. You have lost 12 pounds. You apologize before you open your own refrigerator. Do not tell me everything is fine. I wanted to defend my marriage. Instead, I stared at the sewing table squeezed between the furnace and a stack of Diane's holiday decorations. I don't know how it became this, I said. Tess took my hand. Slowly. That is how most bad things become normal. The first open rupture came when I worked late during a payroll conversion. At 10:43 p.m., I entered the house carrying my laptop and found Diane and Evan seated on the couch with the television off. Your husband has not eaten, Diane announced. There was a rotisserie chicken in the refrigerator, bread on the counter, and a 42-year-old man sitting 15 feet from both. I texted that the system test was running late, I said. Evan knew. Knowing does not put dinner on a plate. I looked at him. Did you tell your mother you were waiting for me to serve you? He rubbed his palms together. No. But you have been staying late a lot. For 9 days. For a project you knew about. I know. I am just saying maybe work doesn't always have to come first. Something inside me stopped pleading. I set my laptop on the floor. There is food in this house. If you chose not to eat it, that was not something I did to you. Diane made a small sound of disbelief. A wife who talks like a supervisor. Michael warned me about women who keep score. I turned to her. Michael died 19 years before he could have an opinion about me. Please stop using him to insult me. Evan stood so fast his knee struck the coffee table. Don't talk about my father like that. I did not. Your mother did. He slept on the couch. The next morning, he left for work without speaking to me. Diane hummed while making coffee. For the next 5 months, I tried every gentle solution I knew. I asked Evan for couples counseling. He said Diane would feel blamed. I suggested a deadline for her move. He said repairs were complicated. I proposed that we visit her condo together and speak with the contractor. Diane cried, and Evan accused me of humiliating her. I began doubting my own memory. Had I agreed to 6 months? Had Diane really called my promotion a hobby with health insurance, or had I misunderstood? When every conflict ended with 2 people explaining your tone back to you, facts became slippery. The day facts hardened again was a bright October Tuesday, 14 months after our wedding. I came home during lunch to retrieve a security badge. Diane was on the screened porch with the door cracked open, speaking on the phone. I heard Aunt Ruth's name and paused in the hall. Ruth does not need to know about the tenant, Diane said. She already asks too many questions. There was a silence. Of course Evan thinks the condo is empty. If he knew the lease renewed, he would ask why I was still here. I am not giving Claire that opening. My fingers tightened around my badge. Diane laughed softly. She is almost done. You should see her. She barely talks at dinner. A few more months and she will leave on her own. Then Evan can keep the house, and I can use the rent to help him buy out whatever she thinks she deserves. I stepped backward before the floorboard near the kitchen could creak. Outside, I sat in my car with both hands on the steering wheel. The maple leaves were red against a sky so blue it looked artificial. For more than a year, I had been asking what else I could do to make Diane accept me and Evan protect me. I had treated their behavior as a misunderstanding waiting for the correct sentence. It was not a misunderstanding. It was a plan. I opened the banking app on my phone. Our joint account showed a balance lower than I expected. I scrolled past the mortgage and utilities until I found a recurring transfer I had never noticed among the automatic payments, $925 on the 3rd of every month, labeled DH Property Services. The first transfer had posted 2 weeks after Diane moved into our house. I did not call Evan. I did not confront Diane. I took screenshots, emailed them to an account neither of them knew existed, and returned to work. That afternoon, I bought a blue binder. My first instinct was to gather every fact in a single night. That was the part of me that handled audits, the part that believed enough columns could make any problem submit. I forced myself to slow down. If Diane had spent a year planning my exit, I could spend a few weeks preparing to stay. I downloaded 18 months of joint account statements while I still had access. The transfers to DH Property Services totaled $11,100. Our debit card had also paid Diane's condo association dues, insurance deductible, medication copays, and a monthly storage unit. In all, $19,460 had left our household for Diane, not including groceries or the increase in utilities after she moved in. My salary had supplied roughly 64% of the joint deposits. I did not treat that number as proof that I mattered more. I treated it as proof that I had been subsidizing a lie. During my next lunch break, I searched county property records. Diane still owned her condo. The address for DH Property Services led to a small management company in Henrico. A cached rental listing showed Diane's unit, same blue kitchen, same balcony, advertised 10 months earlier for $1,725 a month. The listing was marked leased. I printed the public pages at work and placed them in the binder. Then I called a family law attorney. Lila Grant's office occupied the second floor of a converted house near the courthouse. I expected dark wood and intimidation. Instead, there were mismatched chairs, a bowl of peppermints, and a receptionist wearing purple sneakers. Lila listened without interrupting. When I finished, she turned my binder toward herself but did not open it. Before we discuss evidence, what outcome do you want? I had prepared questions about the deed, the bank account, and divorce. I had not prepared for that. I want my home back. I want my husband to act like my husband. And if he will not? My throat tightened. Then I want to leave without being erased from what I built. She nodded. Good. We can plan for both possibilities. Lila explained that leaving the house for safety would not automatically surrender my ownership, but she advised me not to make permanent moves or sign anything under pressure. Virginia used equitable distribution, not a simple rule that every dollar split exactly in half. My premarital contribution, the deed, mortgage payments, and the movement of marital funds could all matter. Diane's long occupancy also meant we should use written notice and lawful process rather than changing locks or putting boxes on the curb. You can set a boundary today, Lila said. Enforcing it may require steps. Do not confuse the existence of steps with the absence of rights. I showed her the recordings I had already made on my phone during arguments. Virginia allowed me to record conversations I was part of, she explained, but I should not plant devices or secretly capture private conversations between other people. I began recording only when Diane spoke directly to me, and I kept contemporaneous notes of everything else. Lila gave me a checklist: redirect my paycheck, preserve statements, secure my identity, photograph valuable property, obtain a credit report, and create a safe place for copies. She also told me to stop trying to surprise myself with the worst possible conclusion. Evidence is for clarity, she said. Not for living in a permanent state of alarm. The next morning, I changed my direct deposit. I placed enough in the joint account to cover my calculated share of the mortgage, utilities, insurance, and groceries. The rest went to an individual account at a different bank. I changed passwords, froze my credit, and rented a small safe deposit box. I also reclaimed 30 minutes a day. I cleared a workbench in Dad's garage and began sewing there 2 times a week after work. The first thing I made was a plain canvas document pouch with a brass zipper. Dad watched me struggle with the thick seam and pretended not to notice when I cried. When I finally told him the whole story, he set down his coffee and stared at the pegboard above his tools. I taught you to help people, he said. I should have taught you that help can have a door on it. This is not your fault. No. But you are my daughter, and I hate that you thought being good meant being quiet. He offered me his guest room. I told him I might need it, but I was not ready to abandon my house just to make Diane's plan convenient. Dad reached across the bench. Then don't leave for her. If you leave, leave for you. At home, my new calm bothered Diane more than tears ever had. I no longer defended the size of the onions. If she criticized dinner, I pointed out the food available and continued eating. When she entered our bedroom without knocking, I stood in the doorway until she left. You have become very cold, she said. I have become clear. Knock before entering. Evan noticed the financial change after his card was declined for a $1,300 transfer. Why did you move your paycheck? He asked that night. Diane was in the sunroom with the television turned low. I knew she could hear us. I am depositing my share of agreed household expenses. I will not fund anything else until we review the statements together. What does that mean? It means $925 has been leaving our account every month through a property manager. Do you know why? His face changed before he answered. It covers Mom's condo costs. You told me insurance covered her housing while the condo was repaired. There were gaps. Is there a tenant in the condo? He looked toward the sunroom. I don't know. I believed that answer. What frightened me was how little relief it brought. Then ask her. He lowered his voice. Why are you making this into an interrogation? Because my money is paying bills for a home your mother says she cannot occupy, and I heard her say someone else is paying rent to occupy it. Evan's jaw tightened. You were listening to her calls? He had found a way to make my discovery the offense. Diane stepped into the doorway as if she had been waiting for her cue. I told Evan the arrangement was temporary, she said. My tenant is a divorced teacher. I could not throw her out in the middle of a school year. I thought you, of all people, would appreciate compassion. How long is the lease? That is my private business. Not while our account pays the condo expenses. Diane's eyes narrowed. There it is. Money. Michael knew a woman obsessed with money would divide this family. This time, I did not answer her. I looked at Evan. Will you review every payment with me tomorrow? He said he was too tired. That was a choice, too. I wrote it down. 3 days later, I received an alert on my phone that an unknown tracking device appeared to be moving with me. The map traced my commute from the hospital office to Dad's house and back home. Tess met me in a grocery store parking lot. We followed the alert sound to a magnetic case behind the felt lining of my trunk. Inside was a small tracker with a strip of pink nail polish across the back. I recognized the color. Diane used it on her keys so she could distinguish them from everyone else's. My hands began shaking so hard that Tess removed the battery for me. I photographed the device in place, saved screenshots of the alert, and called the non-emergency police number. The officer who met us documented it, gave me an incident number, and advised me to keep the device rather than destroy it. Evan was pacing in the kitchen when I got home. Where have you been? I placed the clear evidence bag on the table. Ask your mother. Diane looked at the tracker and did not blink. That came from my key ring. I must have dropped it in your car. Under the trunk lining? You are accusing me over an accident? Evan picked up the bag. Mom loses things. You know that. It followed me for 6 days. You called the police on my mother? I documented a tracking device hidden in my car. His expression hardened in a way I had never seen directed at me. You are trying to build a case against us. The word us landed between us. Not you and me. Him and her. I slept at Dad's house that night, not to surrender my home, but because Lila had told me that safety mattered more than symbolism. I returned the next afternoon with Tess and collected my passport, my mother's sewing machine, and several boxes of personal records. I documented every item I took. Diane stood in the sunroom doorway filming me. This will look terrible in court, she said. So will hiding a tracker. For the first time, her camera dipped. Evan called 12 times that night. I answered the 13th, come home, he said. Has your mother agreed to leave? We cannot solve anything if you refuse to talk. I have been talking for a year. I am asking one question. He was silent. I need time, he finally said. So do I. I stayed with Dad for 4 nights, then returned after installing a keyed lock on our bedroom with Evan's written agreement. Diane called it an act of war. I called it a door. At work, I applied for a compliance manager position I had previously dismissed because Diane said the travel would finish whatever was left of my marriage. The interview panel asked how I handled resistance during investigations. I separate discomfort from danger, I told them. Then I follow the record. It was the most honest answer I had ever given in an interview. Meanwhile, the binder grew. Diane forgot an owner statement from DH Property Services in our printer tray. I did not open a sealed letter or access her email. The page was face up, showing 11 months of rent deposits and management fees. After costs, she had received $15,972 while our joint account covered nearly every expense associated with the condo. I photographed the page where it lay and added the image to my file. The statement also showed a $2,400 owner disbursement 3 days before the tracker appeared in my car. That amount meant nothing until Tess searched the name printed in a tiny memo field, Hawthorne Domestic Consulting. It belonged to a licensed private investigator in Chesterfield. Lila advised me not to contact him directly. She sent a preservation letter informing the agency that records might be relevant to a domestic legal matter. We did not know whether the $2,400 payment was connected to me, and I refused to invent an answer before I had proof. Still, Diane began knowing things she should not have known. She mentioned a coffee shop near Lila's office. She asked whether Dad's garage was comfortable enough for secret meetings. One afternoon, she told Evan I had spent 43 minutes with a man in a gray suit. The man was Lila's paralegal, who had met me in the lobby to notarize an authorization. Evan did not ask how Diane knew. Instead, he asked me who the man was. You are asking the wrong person, I said. 2 weeks later, Aunt Ruth called me. We had never been close, but she had always been kinder than Diane. At our wedding, while fastening my bracelet, she had whispered that Michael would have liked my stubborn chin. I asked if she knew Diane's condo had a tenant. Ruth sighed. I suspected. She told me a teacher wanted to buy some furniture. Then she stopped letting me visit. I told her about the audio Diane played on our honeymoon. Take care of your mother. Family is what stays, I recited. Ruth went so quiet I checked the call screen. Claire, where did she get that? She said it was Michael's message to Evan. It was? Part of one. Michael recorded birthday messages before his second surgery because he was scared he would not make it. I transferred the tapes to my computer years ago. Diane asked for Evan's file. Was that all he said? No. Not even close. I sat down on the basement step. Do you still have the original? I think so. Give me a few days. I told her not to send anything until she found the source file and could explain where it came from. If the recording mattered, I wanted it to withstand more than emotion. The next week, the hospital offered me the manager position. The raise was significant, but what made me cry was the office key. It was a small piece of metal attached to a blue plastic tag. A door I could open. A space no one had reassigned without asking. I bought a lemon cake from the bakery Dad loved. I was foolish enough to think I might tell Evan privately and let one good thing exist outside the conflict. When I pulled into our driveway, 6 unfamiliar cars lined the curb. Inside, Diane had arranged my dining room like a hearing. Aunt Ruth sat near the window, pale and stiff. Cousins Mark and Elise occupied the couch. Pastor Neil from Diane's church stood beside the mantel. Evan was at the table, turning my unopened bank envelope over in his hands. Diane pointed to the chair facing them. Sit down, Claire. This family deserves the truth. On the table were photographs of me entering Lila's office, meeting the paralegal, and hugging Dad outside his garage. The angles made ordinary movements look secretive. A concerned friend saw you, Diane said. I set the cake down. A concerned friend with a telephoto lens? She ignored that. You opened a hidden bank account. You removed money from the marriage. You met men behind Evan's back, and now you have consulted a divorce attorney. Tell everyone why. Evan pushed my envelope across the table. Just show me the account, Claire. If this is innocent, prove it. Pastor Neil shifted uncomfortably. Perhaps everyone should lower the temperature. Diane raised her voice. My son is being robbed in his own home. I looked around the room, then at Aunt Ruth. Her handbag rested upright between her feet. She gave me one small nod. I removed the blue binder from my work bag and placed it beside the lemon cake. I will explain every dollar in my account, I said. After Diane explains why she collected $15,972 in rent while taking $19,460 from ours, and why $2,400 of her money went to the investigator who took these pictures. For the first time that evening, Evan turned toward his mother. Diane recovered first. That is a lie. I opened the binder to the property section and slid copies of the public listing, joint statements, and photographed owner statement across the table. I kept the originals and my phone in front of me. The condo was leased 2 weeks after you moved here. The tenant renewed. Our household paid the property manager, association dues, and most of your personal expenses. Your owner statement shows the rent and the payment to Hawthorne Domestic Consulting. Pastor Neil lifted his hands. Diane, did you hire someone to follow Claire? I hired someone to find out why she was sneaking around. There is a difference. There is, I said. One is concern. The other costs $2,400 and comes with photographs. Evan stared at the images as though they had changed while he was not looking. You told me Mark took these, he said to his mother. Cousin Mark sat forward. You told him what? I have never seen these. Diane's mouth tightened. I said someone Mark knew helped me. You never listen carefully when you're upset. It was a familiar maneuver, alter one word, then accuse the other person of failing to hear it. Evan turned to me. Did you know she hired an investigator? I knew the property statement named one. Lila's office sent a preservation letter. I did not know these photographs existed until I walked in. Lila. My attorney. The woman whose office I visited because you refused counseling, refused a deadline for your mother, and refused to review our own bank statements. Diane tapped my unopened envelope. And the secret account? Contains only my earnings after I changed direct deposit, minus my share of agreed household bills. I have not taken $1 from the existing joint balance. Here are the deposits, the expense calculation, and the statements. I placed the pages in front of Evan. Payroll records were my language. Every figure had a date, a source, and an explanation. Why didn't you tell me first? He asked. I did. I asked you to review the payments. You said you were tired. His eyes dropped. Diane reached for the binder. I put my hand on it. No. You do not touch this. Her face flushed. You came into my home and built a file on me. This is my home. You entered it for 3 weeks and stayed 16 months. Because my condo was unlivable. Your tenant has lived there safely for almost a year. She needed housing. I made a compassionate decision. With my money and without my consent. Diane turned to the pastor. Do you hear how she speaks to me? I gave my whole life to my son. Now this woman reduces family to receipts. Pastor Neil looked at the documents. Receipts matter when money is taken under false pretenses. I had not invited him, and I did not need his approval, but the answer punctured the moral shield Diane expected him to provide. She looked at Evan instead. Tell them you approved the transfers. Evan went still. The silence told me before he did. You knew? I asked. He rubbed both hands over his face. Mom said the rent barely covered the condo mortgage. She said the $925 was temporary until the insurance claim closed. When did you authorize it? The month she moved in. You watched me calculate groceries while $925 left every month, and you never told me. I was going to replace it. With what? More money I put into the same account. Claire, I did not know about the investigator. I swear. Did you know about the tracker? He opened his mouth and stopped. Diane answered for him. He gave me access to the family location account because I worried when he traveled for work. Your devices were connected. No one tracked you. We could simply see where the car was. My stomach turned. The tracker was hidden under my trunk lining. Evan spoke quickly. I gave her the old tablet password. I did not know she could see your phone. After the police report, she said the device must have fallen from her keys. I wanted to believe her. That was the first major truth of the night. Diane had built the machinery, but Evan had opened every gate. He had authorized the money, shared the passwords, accepted the excuses, and repeated her suspicions. His passivity had not been empty space. It had been material she used. You were not trapped between us, I said. You kept choosing the person who punished you less for choosing her. He flinched. That is not fair. No, Evan. It is exact. Diane stood. We are done. I will not sit here while my son is abused in his own house. Aunt Ruth finally spoke. Sit down, Diane. Michael gets a turn. Diane's chair struck the wall as she froze. Ruth removed a small speaker and her phone from her handbag. She told Evan that Michael had recorded messages before a risky surgery in 2004. Ruth had borrowed the tapes to make digital copies for the family. The file metadata on her laptop showed the transfer date 9 years earlier, long before I met Evan. She had brought both the digitized file and the original cassette in a padded case. Your mother asked me for your birthday message after you became engaged, Ruth said. I assumed she wanted you to have it. I did not know she had cut it. Diane moved toward her. This is private. Ruth held the phone against her chest. You made it Claire's business when you used Michael's voice to attack her. Evan looked from his aunt to his mother. Play it. Ruth pressed the screen. Static filled the room, followed by the voice I had heard beneath the bedroom door in Nag's head. Take care of your mother, son. Family is what stays. There was a breath and the scrape of something near the microphone. On the version Diane played, the message had ended there. This one continued. But listen to me carefully. Taking care of her does not mean letting her choose your life. Your mom loves hard when she is afraid, and sometimes that love can crowd the air out of a room. When you build a family of your own, protect that family too. Do not make your wife prove she deserves a place at her own table. If you ever feel forced to choose, ask who is forcing the choice. Michael coughed, then laughed weakly. And tell Ruth I know she stole my good tape recorder. I want it back. The file ended. No one moved. Ruth wiped her cheek. Evan looked as if the floor had shifted beneath him. Diane gripped the back of her chair with both hands. He was medicated, she said. He did not understand how much I would have to carry after he died. He understood you, Ruth replied. That was why he said it. Diane turned on her. You always resented that he trusted me more. No. I resented watching you turn grief into a leash. That was the second truth. For years, Evan had believed obedience kept faith with his father. Diane had removed the very words that separated care from surrender. She had not merely misremembered a dead man's advice. She had edited it. Evan stood, but he did not approach his mother. You played that clip on our honeymoon. You were falling apart. You needed me. You told me Dad would have hated Claire. I said he would have been concerned. You said she was taking me from him. He had been dead for 19 years. Diane began to cry. I had seen those tears stop conversations before. This time, Evan did not move. I was terrified, she said. After your father died, you were all I had. Then she came with her schedules and separate opinions, and suddenly I needed permission to see my own son. Her fear was real. So was the harm she had built from it. Understanding one did not cancel the other. I removed a document from the back of my binder. This is a 30-day notice ending your permission to live here. Lila prepared it under Virginia law. It does not put your belongings outside tonight. It gives you a date and a lawful process. Evan can help you arrange housing, but you will not remain in this house after that date. Diane looked at him. Are you allowing this? He stared at the notice. I answered before he could. I am not asking him to allow my boundary. I am telling both of you what I will do. I placed a second envelope beside it. Evan, this is a proposed temporary separation agreement. I have not filed for divorce. For the next 90 days, I need full financial disclosure, individual counseling for you, couples counseling if my therapist believes it is safe and productive, removal of Diane from every account and device, and a written repayment plan for the unauthorized household transfers. You will enforce the move-out notice yourself. And if I do all of that, he asked. Then I decide whether your actions have changed enough for me to consider rebuilding. This is not a checklist that buys forgiveness. What if I refuse? My voice stayed level. Then Lila files. Diane laughed through her tears. There. She finally admits it. She planned to destroy this family. I looked at the unopened cake between us. I planned to survive whatever choice your son made. The gathering dissolved without the explosion Diane seemed to expect. Mark and Elise left after telling Evan they would speak to him later. Pastor Neil apologized to me for attending without asking what the meeting was. I told him the apology belonged in whatever conversation at church had made Diane believe he would support an ambush. Ruth stayed long enough to copy the full audio file to my attorney's secure link. Before leaving, she hugged Evan. Your father loved your mother, she told him. He also knew love needs limits. Diane locked herself in the sunroom. I carried the lemon cake to my car and drove to Dad's house. Dad was awake in the kitchen when I arrived. He did not ask whether the meeting had gone well, my face had answered that from the doorway. I set the cake on his counter and finally told him why I had bought it. Manager Claire Benton, he said, reading the message piped across the frosting. Your mother would have called every person she knew. He found 2 chipped dessert plates and cut slices much too large for midnight. I cried then, not over Diane, or even Evan, but because my promotion had nearly been swallowed by another family emergency. Dad made me describe the interview, the salary, and the office with the blue-tagged key. Before we discussed the ambush again, he raised his fork. One good thing gets to be good tonight, he said. So we let it. Evan did not call that night. At 8:10 the next morning, he sent one message. I signed the notice. Mom has 30 days. I made an appointment with a therapist. I am sorry that I waited for proof big enough to excuse doing what you had asked all along. It was the first apology he had given me without attaching his mother's pain to it. I did not move home. For 5 weeks, I lived in Dad's guest room and watched what Evan did when I was not there to guide him. He removed Diane from the shared tablet and changed every password. He closed the automatic transfer, requested statements directly from the property manager with Diane's written consent, and calculated the amount he had concealed from me. From his separate savings and the sale of a motorcycle he rarely rode, he returned $13,000 to the joint account. We agreed the remaining amount would come from his share of future deposits, not mine. Most important, he served the notice himself. Diane spent the first week telling relatives I had made her homeless. The claim weakened when Ruth reminded them about the rented condo and when the property manager confirmed that the tenant's lease had 5 months remaining. Evan offered Diane 2 choices, a furnished senior apartment near her church, which she could afford from the condo rent, or Aunt Ruth's basement after they installed a stair rail. Diane chose the apartment because accepting Ruth's help would have required admitting Ruth was right. On move-out day, I returned with Tess. Diane's boxes filled the hallway, but my mother's sewing machine was already safe at Dad's. Evan carried the portrait of Michael to the truck. Diane stood at the front door in her coat. You won, she said to me. This was never a contest. My son will blame you when I am gone. I looked at Evan. He answered. No, Mom. I will blame myself for waiting this long. Her face crumpled, but he did not withdraw the statement. He hugged her, told her he would call Sunday, and stepped back. Care with a door on it. After the truck left, I walked through the sunroom. The wall where Michael's portrait had hung was a lighter rectangle. Sunlight covered the floor. For the first time in 16 months, there was room to hear my own breathing. I still did not move home that day. Evan and I began counseling separately. 3 weeks later, we met together in a therapist's office with 2 clocks, a box of tissues, and no family photographs on the walls. Evan did not ask me to forgive him. He described what he had done in verbs: authorized, concealed, dismissed, shared, doubted. Our therapist made him stop every time he said, I felt caught in the middle. The middle is where you stood, she told him. It is not where you were chained. He learned that guilt was a feeling, not an instruction. I learned that a boundary was not real if I abandoned it whenever someone looked hurt. At the end of 90 days, I chose not to file for divorce. I also refused to declare the marriage healed. Evan moved into the guest room when I returned. We kept separate personal accounts and one household account with alerts on every transfer. Diane had no key. No one entered our house without an invitation. Trust returned in unremarkable pieces. Evan told his mother no and survived her silence. He reviewed the statements before I asked. When work sent me to Baltimore for 2 nights, he did not make a joke about secret meetings. When I closed the sunroom door to sew, he knocked. There was one final test 4 months after Diane moved out. Ruth called to warn us that Diane had contacted Evan's former girlfriend, a woman he had dated in college. Diane invited her to a church fundraiser and suggested Evan's marriage was nearly over. I handed Evan the phone. "This belongs to you," I said. He called Diane on speaker, not because I demanded an audience but because secrecy had been the soil where the damage grew. "Do not contact people from my past to interfere with my marriage," he said. "Do not discuss Claire at church. If you do it again, I will stop calls and visits for 3 months." Diane cried that Claire had written the script. "No," Evan said. "Dad did, in the part you cut out. I am protecting the family I built." He ended the call while she was still arguing. His hands shook afterward. I did not reward him like a child for doing the minimum. I simply sat beside him until the shaking stopped. Consequences came slowly. Hawthorne Domestic Consulting confirmed through attorneys that Diane had hired the investigator and misrepresented her purpose. No laws had been broken by photographing me in public, but the agency terminated her contract and preserved the records. The police report about the tracker remained on file. I chose not to pursue further action after Diane signed a written agreement to stop monitoring or contacting my workplace. Lila made clear that another incident would change that decision. Diane also had to live within her own income. Once our payments stopped, the condo rent covered her apartment and property costs but not the constant extras Evan had supplied. She sold some furniture, created a budget, and began attending a grief group that Ruth found through a community center rather than her church social circle. Nearly a year passed before Diane apologized. It came as a text to Evan, not to me. "Tell Claire I am sorry I opened her mail and had her followed. I thought fear made it protection. It did not. I read it twice." "Do you want to answer?" Evan asked. "Tell her I received it. Nothing more yet." That was enough. Forgiveness did not have to arrive on the schedule of the person requesting it. 3 years have passed since the dinner with the lemon cake. I still work for the hospital, now as Director of Compliance Operations. Dad is retired and spends Tuesday mornings teaching basic repairs at the community center. Tess claims my boundaries made me less fun, but she says it while using the sunroom to spread out fabric for our annual quilt donation. Evan and I are still married. That sentence is not a trophy, and it is not proof that staying is always brave. Leaving would have been brave, too. We stayed because he changed his behavior after I stopped accepting his intentions as evidence. It took more than one apology, more than one therapy appointment, and more than the shock of hearing his father's complete message. It took years of ordinary choices no one applauded. Diane lives in her condo again. When the teacher's lease ended, she did not renew it. She joined the community center's garden group and discovered that other people her age had losses that did not require controlling their children. Our relationship is civil and limited. She visits when invited. She knocks. She waits. Last spring, she arrived carrying a paper bag of tomatoes and basil she had grown. At the door, she looked past me toward the sunroom, where my mother's sewing machine stood beneath the window. "The light is good in there," she said. "It is." She held out the bag. I brought too much. We both knew she had not. Diane measured everything she gave away. But I accepted the bag because it was an offering, not an entry fee. That summer, Evan and I returned to Nag's Head. We rented a small place with 1 bedroom and turned off our phones before sunrise. At Bodie Island Lighthouse, we climbed 214 steps without anyone calling us back down. At the top, the wind was strong enough to pull tears from my eyes. Marshland spread below us in green and gold, and the Atlantic formed a bright line beyond it. Evan stood beside me without reaching for my hand until I offered it. "Do you regret giving me the 90 days?" he asked. I thought about the question before answering. I do not regret refusing to disappear. The 90 days were yours to use. The choice was always mine. On the drive home, the bag of Diane's basil sat between us, filling the car with a clean, sharp scent. Love was still there. So were locks, separate passwords, bank alerts, and the memory of a blue binder beside an unopened cake. For most of my life, I thought a strong family was one with no closed doors. I know better now. A healthy home has doors. The people who love you knock, and the people who respect you wait to be invited in.